Hey there nation, and welcome to the show where we help you to play miniatures wargaming on a budget. It is I, Commander Cheapskate, and we're back on another episode of Way of the Underhive. This series is dedicated to helping brand new players to Necromunda build their starting rosters and learn more about the game mechanics of their favorite gangs. And on today's episode, we will discuss playing a House Ty Outcast Gang for Necromunda Ashwaste. We will discuss their strengths, their weaknesses, the fighters, their playstyle, as well as provide critical information that you can use in your campaign. Now that Necromunda is starting to take place inside of the Ashwaste, outside of High Primus, playing an Outcast gang, especially from one of the noble houses, is actual viable option now, and playing a House Ty gang will definitely be so. Now granted, House Ty is considered one of the weakest noble house delegations you can use to form a delegation gang out of. However, I have found an interesting game mechanic using psychic abilities, which I think will give you the fighting edge you need to be dominant in the Ashwastes. So with that being said, let's get this video on a roll. Alright, so let's talk about the strengths of playing a delegation outcast gang. So potentially it's one of the most powerful starting gangs that you can actually have in a campaign, and the reason why is because the fighters that make up your delegations. Regardless if you're playing criminal, merchant, or noble house delegations, they usually all start off with excellent equipment and skills right from the start. In some cases they have some really good stats, and they have some very powerful special rules that can make them really advantageous and very competitive in an Ashwaste campaign. At the same time, you can also take advantage of weird disciplines now because the Book of the Outcast released those weird disciplines. You can even customize your fighters even further. And in addition to adding vehicles with heavier weapon options and different boons and weapon gears from those vehicles, could also give your delegation gang a huge advantage out in the Ashways of Necromunda. And these are some of the advantages and strengths of actually playing a delegation outcast gang. Alright, so perhaps the biggest weakness of actually playing a delegation gang that's an outcast gang is that you cannot take any alliances whatsoever. If you decide to use the delegation as the core of your gang, no alliances are available to you. So for example, if you're a merchant guild delegation gang, you can't take criminal alliances or noble house alliances, and vice versa for all the other ones as well. So that's one of the biggest weaknesses of playing a delegation gang. If you really like using alliances to help your gang out, this might not be the one for you. However though, like I said before in the strengths, it does give you a leg up in the actual beginning of a campaign because you have better fighters, better equipment, and better skills. Now one of the weaknesses of this gang, of course, is that if you decide to play WYSIWYG, which is an acronym for what you see is what you get type of gangs, this can be quite pricey in my opinion. And the reason why is because, for example, if you were to play a Nauticon siphoning delegation, for example, as the core of your gang, and you want to buy the Forge World miniatures in order to fill that gang, those Forge World miniatures can be quite expensive. So because of that, I would suggest looking for cheaper alternatives or convert your own in most cases. A lot of these delegations have not been manufactured yet, so you could possibly do that, but that's just something you might want to take into account. Me, of course, I would never actually do that. I would just convert my own or find alternate ways to get cheaper miniatures, and that's the thing I would keep in mind when I would be playing a delegation gang. At the same time, these gangs are also very expensive to field in terms of credits. These delegations, like I said, have a lot of skills, a lot of weapons, better stats, and you're going to pay for those. For example, I think the cheapest of the delegations starts off at like 540 credits, I believe. So because of that, it's going to be very, very expensive for you to field these fighters, but that's the way it goes. And lastly, probably the biggest weakness of actually playing an outcast delegation gang is that you do have to beware of the balanced bandwagon. A lot of balanced bandwagon types will scream overpowered or game breaking or unfair and so on and so forth. But of course, once again, just ignore those immaturity of those players, drink the salt of their tears, and just use that to power yourself in destroying your enemies. So these are some of the strengths and weaknesses involved with playing a delegation gang. Alright, so when it comes to delegation gangs, once again, you get to pick from merchant guilds, criminal syndicates, or noble houses, and use those delegations you get from those alliances to form the core of your gang. Leaders also get archetypes and affiliations depending on what delegation you choose. Also, champions also get archetypes as well, so that allows for a lot of customization for your different members of your delegations depending on the affiliations and the archetypes that you choose. Now once again, remember, archetypes depend on what kind of primary and secondary skills your champions and your leaders receive, while affiliations usually determine what kind of weapons and equipment you can get from the starting list, if not from the trading post as well. At the same time, the nice thing about these delegations is that the members of those delegations gain experience and they can purchase weapons and equipment over time, just like any other gang, so that part is really, really cool. And once again, I have to make sure I stress this a lot. If you decide to take a delegation outcast gang, you cannot make any alliances whatsoever in the future, so just be aware when that actually happens and keep that in mind. So when it comes to the actual noble houses of Necromunda and your delegation gangs, you actually have 6 different delegations you can actually choose from to form the very core of your gang. And those delegations are the House Catalyst Carnival, that's your first option, the House Ulanti Court Advisors, House Graham Military Attaché, House Co-Iron Ministerium Delegation, House Ranlo Auditing Conclave, or the House Ty Onmyodo Coven. So all 6 of the noble houses are available for delegations to use for the core for your noble outcast gang, and pretty much it just kind of depends on what you want to use and the various things you want to play and how you want to create the aesthetic for your outcast noble gang. So that being said, now that we're done talking about the delegations you can choose from, let's go ahead and talk about the specific core of your gang for the house that you choose on the next slide. So let's go ahead and talk about the House Ty Onmyodo Coven. This is going to cost you 300 credits to fill this for your delegation for your outcast gang. Now, it's an interesting delegation and even more interesting game mechanic with the control collar. Pretty much what ends up happening is you must either have the control collar on and be for one of your players at all times. Either it's the telepath or the null. When one person's control collar is on, the other person can use their power, and then vice versa as well. This is a double-edged sword, just as much as it has for much reward as for risk, just because by turning on your control collars on and off will determine pretty much what happens to your gang as well. At the same time, you also have pretty powerful weapons and equipment choices available to you as well from this house list. You get access to shock staves, power swords, bolt guns, as well as power swords, which are really, really important as well. It also has the potential to what I like to call the House Ty Onmyodo hive mind. And what this is that it basically allows you to network your various Wyrds and their psychic abilities within your gang. And the reason why this is possible is because of the Onmyodo Telepath's Unbreakable willpower. Now it says basically the rule for that is that any friendly fighter within 9 inches can use the Telepath's cool or willpower characteristic when making a cool or willpower test. Now the Onmyodo Telepath does have a willpower of 5+, which means that their powers will trigger 83% of the time. So by using this Unbreakable willpower, that means your outcast champions can become Wyrds, which means that they can substitute their 8+ willpower with the Telepath's 5+ willpower, triggering the psychic powers 83% of the time as well. So because of that, by networking your psychic abilities, you can actually dominate pretty easily using psychic powers, and I'm going to show you exactly some examples of ways that you can use that power and actually make those networks of psychic abilities to make your gang extremely awesome. Alright, so the very first person we're going to talk about real quick is the Onmyodo Telepath. This fighter costs 125 credits, and this fighter will also be the leader of your gang as well. For the Telepath stats, we have a movement characteristic of 5 inches, a 5+ weapon skill, 5+ ballistic skill. They have 3 strength, 3 toughness, 1 wound, 4+ initiative, 1 attack. They have 8 leadership, 7 cool, 5+ for willpower, as well as 7+ for intelligence. So like I said before, the Onmyodo Telepath will be the leader of your gang, and I suggest, of course, giving them the Wyrd archetype for their character for obvious reasons, so that way they could actually get more psychic abilities later on. However, instead of taking a 3rd Wyrd power, I suggest taking the commanding presence skill instead under leadership for larger group activations, and I'll talk about why that is the case here in a second. Now, unfortunately, the Telepath's weapon choices and equipment choices are not that good. They start off with a shock stave and refractor field, which is good for defending themselves, but unfortunately the Onmyodo Telepath doesn't have very good physical stats for close combat. With a 5+ for weapon skill and ballistic skill and 1 wound, the Telepath is not going to do very much. Now, while having the refractor field is nice by giving you a 5+ save, it's not enough to protect them. Same thing with the shock stave as well. It's not enough to help them out either. So my suggestion to you is to suggest purchasing an armored undersuit as well as mesh armor for your fighter for extra protection. What that basically do is give them a 4+ armor save. As the campaign develops, purchase light or heavy carapace armor for additional protection. Now, in my opinion, the heavy carapace armor is better, and the reason why is because it doesn't matter that you're going to suffer movement or initiative penalties, because your Onmyodo Telepath is never going to be in the fight. All you need is armor to protect them as well. At the same time, hazard suits are also kind of nice as well. The reason why, because it gives you protection from weapon traits like Radphage, for example, Toxin and Blaze, and plus it gives you a 6+ armor save as well. Now, when it comes to your Onmyodo Telepath, they do have control collars, so that way you have to have that game mechanic taking place with them. I suggest you leave their control collar off so that way they can use their psychic powers. They also come with Sanction psychic abilities, so that's going to help get those psychic powers off. They also have the Overseer skill, which is really cool, and they also come with 2 psychic powers right off the bat. I suggest that you stick with the Telepathy discipline, and I'll talk about why that is the case here in a second. Like I said before, always keep the control collar on for your off for your telepath unless you plan on closing the distance to your enemy. When you are then triggered off, so that way you can use your abilities and destroy your opponent as well. Now, Fearful Aura will be nice because it will protect your telepath from being charged. And as for powers, I suggest Mind Control as well as Unbreakable Will. Mind Control is perfect for making your opponents use their own shooting attacks against themselves. And like I said before, the Unbreakable Will is going to be really important for you to get what I like to call the House Ty Hive Mind. Well, like I said before, what ends up happening is that any friendly fire within 9 inches can use the Telepath's Cool or Willpower characteristic when making a Cool or Willpower test. Having that 5+ Willpower will trigger 83% of your powers all the time, 83% of the time, which is really, really good. Which means that if you use that for your champions who are also Wyrds, they can trigger their powers 83% of the time, and so on and so forth. And like I said, you can really dominate with psychic powers. Alright, so the next part we're going to talk about for your delegation is the Onmyodo Null. This person costs 175 credits, and let's go ahead and talk about their statistics. So for the Onmyodo Null, we're talking about a 5-inch movement characteristic, 4+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill, as well as 3 strength, 3 toughness. They have 1 wound, 4+ for initiative, 1 attack. They also have 8 leadership, 5 cool, 7 willpower, as well as 7 intelligence. Now your Onmyodo Null will be your ganger for your starting gang as well, so they'll be taking up in your ganger slots. They're equipped with mesh armor, bolt guns, as well as power sword and respirator, so this fighter is actually a pretty decent shooter or close combat fighter. While their stats may not be all that impressive, they're actually kind of mediocre. But they actually have really good weapons, and that's the reason why that makes them so deadly. My suggestion would probably be either purchase a telescopic sight for your bolt gun if you get the chance, and mesh armor for your null as well, so that way they have a 5-up armor save as well. And like I said before, they do have control collars, and they also have the second null ability, which is really good, as well as the True Grit skill. Now, True Grit is a good way to make the null more survivable, so that part's kind of cool. But while the control collar is on for the telepath, so that way they can, not have to worry about using their psychic abilities, the null's control power is off, and basically their power disrupts enemy psychic powers, as well as forbid your enemy from using them within 6 inches. At the same time, there's also a handicap that all fighters suffer -2 to their cool tests when they're in 6 inches of this fighter as well, if their control collar is off. Now this would be bad for keeping this guy around your gang, but luckily for us though, this huge problem is easily mitigated with a new piece of equipment available to the Ash Waste, which is the Waster's Dirt Bike. That costs you 50 credits. You can keep this fighter isolated from the rest of the gang, use him as an advanced scout roaming ahead to cause all kinds of problems for your enemy, canceling out their psychic abilities, giving them -2 stats to their cools, all kinds of stuff. This solves the negatives of the control collar while at the same time increasing the positive the effect they have, and buy that dirt bike as soon as possible. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the Underhive Outcast Champion real quick. For these gangs, these guys cost 60 credits apiece, and for their stats, they have 5-inch movement, 3+ weapon skill, 4+ ballistic skill. They have 3 strength, 3 toughness. They also have 2 wounds, they have 4 initiative, 1 attack. They have 6 leadership, 7 cool, 8 willpower, as well as 8 intelligence. So let's go on and talk about these guys real quick. So when it comes to the Underhive Outcast Champions, they're very versatile, and the reason why is because their stats are pretty much mediocre. Now that's both a good and a bad thing. While it might be bad because they can't excel at any one given thing, whether it's shooting or close combat, it does allow them to be able to equip a large variety of weapons and fulfill any role that you need them to fulfill within your gang as well. Now when it also comes to your guys' Underhive Outcast Champions, archetypes of course are very, very important, but the problem with these guys though is that their archetypes are very limited for their skills in my opinion. For example, they have 5 different archetypes they can choose from, but they only have 1 primary skill, and each of those archetypes followed by 2 secondaries. So for example, if you were to take the Brawler archetype, Brawn would be your primary with Ferocity and Leadership as your secondaries. If you were a Gunslinger archetype, Shooting would be your primary with Agility as well as Leadership as your secondaries. For a Survivor archetype, Ferocity would be your primary, followed by Combat and Leadership for your secondaries. For Mastermind, Cunning would be your primary, with Leadership and Savant as your secondaries. And of course, for Wyrd archetypes, your Psychic Disciplines would be your primary, followed by Cunning and Leadership as your secondaries. Unfortunately for the champion, there are no archetypes where combat is a primary, so that is kind of limiting on what you can do. So you won't be getting any skills really to increase your combat abilities, but better weapons and equipment choices could probably help out with that as well. Now when it comes to their equipment and weapons, they can purchase pretty much anything they want to off the trading post so long as it's within the rarity value of 8 on the trading post. So they are kind of limited in some of their choices, but the reason why that is the case is because you can take 1 champion for every 3 Hive Scum in your gang. So for example, if you have 6 Hive Scum in your gang, you can take 2 champions. If you got 9 Hive Scum, you can get 3 champions, and etc. So that's basically where the trade-off kind of comes in. And then finally, of course, we have our Underhive Outcast HIVE Scum, which is your typical Ganger and Juvie level fighter for your gang. These guys cost 30 credits apiece. For their stats, they have 5-inch movement, 4+ weapon skill and ballistic skill, 3 strength and toughness. They have 1 wound, 4+ for initiative, 1 attack. They have 8+ for leadership, cool, willpower, and intelligence. And for their skill access, when they become a specialist, their primary is cunning, with ferocity as their secondary. Now, Underhive Scum, Outcast Scum, they're very mediocre, okay? But because of that, they're also very cheap to field. And even though they have very mediocre stats, they count as both gangers and Juvie level fighters for your gang, and because their stats are still so mediocre, they can fulfill many different roles in your gang. You can equip them as shooters, close combat, you can use them as support, you can use them as suicide bombers, especially now that you can also put them on waster dirt bikes. They make great pursuers on waster dirt bikes, for example. So there's a variety of things you can do with these guys to fulfill pretty much any role that you want to. And plus, if you decide to make it into a delegation gang, you can also take better weapons equipment from the delegation lists as well. So that's another cool thing about Outcast Hive Scum as well. Now, unfortunately, you cannot start your campaign with an Outcast specialist, so that part is kind of sad. Almost every single gang can have a specialist except for Outcast, so that part is kind of sad, but that's the kind of the trade-off. Yes, you can't get those specialists, but right at the start, but you'll eventually, you have so many guys you can choose from, and plus your delegations can fulfill those roles anyways, so it's not that big of an issue. So that makes up your guys' Outcast Hive Scum. Alright, so let's go ahead and talk about the starting list. I like to call this the House Ty Onmyodo Hive Mind Outcast Gang. This costs you 1,395 credits. So for your roster, you're going to have a House Ty Onmyodo Telepath, which costs you 160 credits. For this fighter, you're giving them the Wyrd Archetype, as well as an armored undersuit, as well as a hazard suit, shock, stave, refractor field, and control collar. You're giving them the commanding presence skill with using the telepathy discipline of mind control, as well as unbreakable rule. Now for your next purchase, you're going to purchase an Outcast Champion. Champion number 1 is going to cost you 185 credits, as well as Champion number 2 is also going to cost you 85 credits. Both of these champions are equipped exactly the same. Both are Wyrd archetypes, both will have armored undersuits, both will have hazard suits as well. Both will be armed with combat pistols, which are stub gun with plasma pistols. Both will have power swords, and both of them will use telekinesis and discipline, and they have the force field ability as well. After that, you'll have your House Ty Onmyodo Null, which costs you 240 credits. This fighter will have mesh armor. It's going to cost you 15 credits for that, as well as bolt gun, power sword, respirator, control collar. They also have the Null special rule, as well as a true grit skill, and you're giving them a waster's dirt bike. After that, you will have 2 Outcast Hive Scum, Outcast number 1 and 2. They're both cost you 55 credits. They're both equipped exactly the same with flak armor and last guns. And then you will also have 2 more Outcast Scum, Scum number 3 and 4. They both cost you 80 credits, and they're both equipped exactly the same with mesh armor, shotguns with solid scatter shots, as well as stub guns. And then finally, you have 2 Scum Racers. Scum Racer number 1 is going to cost you 240 credits because you're purchasing a Ridge Runner, as well as a mining laser on that Ridge Runner. And then Scum number 2 will have 115 credits. That guy will be equipped with a Ridge Runner. Now, this gang takes full advantage of my patented House Onmyodo Hive Mind build, is what I'm calling it. And the reason why is because of the Telepath's ability to use Unbreakable Will. Like I said before, any friendly fighters in 9 inches of this can use the Telepath's cool or willpower characteristic when making a cool or willpower test. And with the Telepath having a 5+ willpower, they're going to trigger their powers 83% of the time. Now, because of that, your Outcast champions will also become Wyrds, which means that they can also substitute their A+ willpower characteristic for the Telepath's 5+, making their psychic powers trigger 83% of the time, and so on and so forth. Now, this time, however, though, you will be spamming this power with your 2 Psychers, who are both your champions, by using the Force Field power. What that does, that means everyone in the 3-inch area will add +1 to their saves, and since you got 2 of them and these abilities stack, it gives them +2 to their armor saves for everyone within 3 inches, making your fighters have really powerful armor saves. Now, there is the Fist of Fury special ability for the Telekinesis discipline, which allows your fighters to have +1 strength and +1 attacks, but only if they fight unarmed. I think that special rule is kind of weak sauce, so I'm allowing my players to use it for all their melee attacks, whether it's unarmed or otherwise. However, though, you should ask your arbitrator beforehand. I'm sure your arbitrator will be okay with it, but if not, though, realize it's their campaign, their rules. Now, this gang consists of 3 fire teams. It consists of 2 assault fire teams as well as 1 support fire team. Assault Fire Team number 1 consists of your House Ty Onmyodo Telepath, your Outcast Champion number 1, Outcast Champion number 2, Outcast Scum number 3, Outcast Scum number 4, as well as Scum Racer number 2. This fire team's mission is to use Scum Racer 2's Ridge Runner to close in with the enemy, and then from there the Onmyodo Telepath uses their commanding presence to also activate Outcast Champions 1 and 2. The Telepath then uses Unbreakable Will, transferring their 5+ willpower to their champions. The champions in turn will then spam Force Field, giving +2 armor saves every 1 3 inches. That means that the Onmyodo Telepath and the champions will have an armor save of 3+. They will also have 3+ for their toughness for gas attacks, as well as immunity to blaze and rash phase traits because they're hazard suits. And at the same time, the Onmyodo Telepath also has a 5 of ward save due to the Refractor field. Now the champions will use their power swords as well as their combat pistols of stub guns and plasma guns to great effect and close combat. Meanwhile, Hive Scum number 3 and 4 will also have a 3-up armor save as well, and they'll provide close shooting with their shotguns and stub guns in close combat. Now your second fire team, Assault Fire Team number 2, will consist of your House Ty Onmyodo Null. This fighter will fight solo due to their null ability, and they will ride on the outskirts of the engagement area at least 7 inches away from other fighters. The bolt gun is good for close to medium range shooting, while the power sword will be good to use in close combat as well as ride by. As the campaign develops, you might want to hire more Hive Scum mounted on Wasters dirt bikes to make this assault team just a little bit more viable. Just remember, keep them away from the null, otherwise they'll suffer that -2 to their cool. After that, you have your support fire team, which consists of Outcast Scum 1 and 2, as well as Scum Racer number 1. This fire team's mission is to engage the enemy at distance. Scum Racer number 1 uses their mining laser to target enemy vehicles. Meanwhile, Outcast Scum number 1 and 2 use their last guns to open fire at close and medium ranges. In the future, purchase hotshot power packs as well as telescopic sights for these last guns to make a more lethal output for the last guns. And this makes it what I like to call my Hive Mind House Myodo build. So in conclusion, Noble House Delegation Outcast Gangs are some of the great ways to add some more diversity to a campaign. You have a lot of powerful options with your Noble House Delegations. You can also make some pretty interesting gangs by throwing in Outcast Hive Scum as well as Outcast Champions. And now that you have the access to vehicles, you can even make more crazy combinations out there. In fact, in my opinion, adding these Delegation Outcast Gangs is a great way to add a lot of diversity into an already diverse game set with all kinds of different gangs and builds, and it just adds to the diversity and the creativity of players in order to create newer gangs that throw out there in the campaigns. So with that being said, pick your favorite Noble House and head out there into the ash waste to reclaim your glory and your honor and to rise back up to the noble ranks of the noble houses. Just as always, of course, watch out for your balanced bandwagon guys, because those guys will always gripe and complain and always find something wrong with the game and try to blame you for the reasons why they can't play so well. So that being said, feel free to comment, like, and or subscribe. Your guys' input is invaluable to us as always. Also check us out on Facebook, Instagram, as well as blogger.com for all the latest greatest hobby news related to this channel. That's good for this week, guys. We'll catch you guys next one. Peace out and stay classy.